Live from Washington, I'm Aisha Tanzim, and you're watching Access Point. BJP's historic victory in Indian elections is widely seen as a mandate for its leader Narendra Modi, a polarizing figure who evokes extreme feelings. To supporters, he is the economic strongman, the efficient administrator who will take India to new heights of success. To opponents, he is the Hindu nationalist with a tarnished past who will damage India's secular image. He has already made history by inviting all the SAARC countries to his oath-taking ceremony this Monday. Is it an indication of how a Modi-led India will deal with its neighbors, or will the past rhetoric of a muscular India dominate his foreign policy? Let's ask our guests. Shirja Nawaz is the director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council, and Sadanand Dhume is a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a columnist at the Wall Street Journal. Gentlemen, welcome to Access Point.
Good to be here.
So let me start with you, Shirja. What do you think? Modi's foreign policy, muscular India or business first?
Too early to tell.
Okay.
He obviously is a much stronger prime minister, and that's probably a good thing for the region as a whole. You have a very strong prime minister in Pakistan. You have a fairly strong prime minister in Bangladesh, although under circumstances that are questionable at best. And you're likely to have a fairly popular president in Afghanistan. So for the region as a whole, this is the first time in a very long time that you will have civilians running things who are supported by their populations.
Do you agree it's too early to tell, or are there indications?
I don't think it's an either-or question. I think you can be both an economic modernizer and take strong positions on defense and national security issues. So on the one hand, you're going to see an Indian foreign policy that is driven by economics and trade. But on the other hand, you're also going to see military modernization. So I would say it's not either or, it's both.
How do you balance that with countries like India and China, for example? I was reading Kamal Sibal is supporting being very tough on China on border issues, tough with Pakistan vis-a-vis terrorism issues, and yet you're also trying to expand business with them. How do you balance that?
I think in both cases, it's a question of placing economics front and center, but not at the cost of national security. So I imagine that as long as we have there's no major terrorist attack and things are broadly peaceful between India and Pakistan, I'm quite confident that Modi would reach out to Pakistan. He's already invited Nawaz Sharif to his swearing in, but also reach out more substantively in terms of deepening trade ties. It's in both countries' interests. It's certainly something that would fit with both prime ministers in terms of their outlook. However, the big question mark is that if there is a terrorist attack or something like that, it would be much harder for a Modi government to turn the other cheek than a Manmohan Singh government. And
Shirja, he's kind of hit the nail over the head. It's very easy to make it all work when everything's going well, but if everything's not going well. We had an attack in Afghanistan in Herat on the Indian consul. We don't know who did this, but in the past, India has alleged ISI involvement. What if something like that happens here? How will a Modi government react?
Obviously, it'll be in a stronger position at home, and so you're likely to see him pushing much farther and letting the military make some decisions which the previous government wasn't allowing them to make. But on China also, I think there's probably going to be a continuation of the policies of the old government, which is to continue the trade with China, but at the same time strengthen the military position. The previous government had already committed to creating a new corps. So that's a good 90,000 people all told that will be deployed along the Chinese border.
When you say letting the military make some decisions that the previous government didn't let them make, what exactly are you talking about?
The possibility of punitive raids comes to mind because that's how the military thinks.
Inside India or inside China or both?
No. If the attack occurs from Pakistani soil or is connected with Pakistan, the possibility of some kind of a punitive quick action raid. This really doesn't solve the problem, but it certainly calms down those extreme groups within the country that feel that India needs to assert its position.
I want you to add to that. In the past, when this happened during Congress's tenure, BJP was the one making all the ruckus. Now BJP is in government, so would Congress make a similar ruckus if something happens, let's say on LOC or in Afghanistan, or would Modi get a free pass?
I think that, the couple of things. The first is that, by and large, there's quite a lot of continuity in Indian foreign policy. It's not as though things are dramatically different. But what you're going to see is a difference in emphasis. And I think Shuja brought this out very nicely when he talked about India's China policy. Similarly, in terms of Pakistan, what you're going to see basically is more of an emphasis on blocking any kind of terrorist attacks. You're going to see the government take a tougher stand. I'm not sure how Congress would play, but if your question is that does Congress try to then become more hawkish than BJP in opposition, I think that's quite unlikely.
Okay. So on the question of the terrorist attacks, during the last few years we had skirmishes on LOC. We saw it become very hot when the Prime Minister Sharif and Manmohan Singh were in New York. The attack on Kabul comes to mind. How would Modi deal with incidents like this that are terrorist attacks but also a low level? They're not a Mumbai.
I think the first and most important thing is that I think that the idea of the economic relationship and normalization and negotiation on a set of issues is just going to be tethered much more firmly to the issue of terrorism. So the security side of the dialogue and the non-security aspects are going to be much more firmly coupled. So the idea that, some stuff can go on, but at the same time India will keep talking, which is something that the previous government was more comfortable with, this government will be very uncomfortable with, because for Modi's supporters, not just his core supporters, but across the spectrum, the people who have voted for the BJP, including many younger voters. I just spent a few weeks in Uttar Pradesh, younger voters from the 18 to 22 age group who have backed him enormously. They really are backing him because they like the idea of, the strong India, resurgent India. So in terms of wiggle room, as long as if there are these kinds of incidents, there isn't going to be that much wiggle room. But I think we shouldn't start off on an overly pessimistic note. I think that we shouldn't presume that something is going to go wrong. Things could in fact get better. There could in fact be greater regional cooperation. There could be a deepening of economic linkages. All that is also on the cards. So I wouldn't want to start off with a glass half empty, because potentially this is a glass half full.
And Shuja, after today's attack in Afghanistan, there was a statement by the Pakistani Foreign Ministry condemning the attack. So do you see Pakistan also changing its tone and maybe changing its foreign policy a little bit?
Well, there is an opportunity for Pakistan now to start this relationship on a new footing. And I was in both India and Pakistan at the beginning of the elections in India, and so had a chance to talk to people on both sides. It's quite clear that there's a great expectation on the part of Indian officialdom that Pakistan, by speeding up the trial of the Mumbai associated terrorist groups, may be delivering a promise that was made to the previous government. This is part of the continuity that Sadanand mentioned. I think some of the things will remain the same. The issues will not change. The positions of the two governments will not change dramatically. The emphasis will change. But if the Pakistanis, as promised, deliver in the May-June period on those trials, then that sets the ground for engagement on a broader front, including trade, on which the expectation should not be that India will give up things or that Pakistan will give up things. It will be mutually assured dependence on the part of the two.
And both need to get something out of it. Now, the invitation to SAARC countries, what does that indicate to you, Tumay?
I think it's clearly a signal that for the Modi government, the neighborhood is tremendously important. He could have reached out more broadly, but instead he's sending a signal that he wants to work cooperatively with India's neighbors, that the neighboring countries are extremely important. And so that's the symbolism behind it. And if you think about it, that makes sense, right? This is really a government that's been elected, above all, to put the economy in order. It's important for India, if it's putting its economy in order, to be in a region that is stable and peaceful. So it completely dovetails with the larger points on which he's been campaigning.
Okay, and now in response to this invitation, should Mr. Nawaz Sharif go himself, or there are some indications from Pakistan that because an Indian Prime Minister hasn't visited Pakistan since '99, that maybe he should just send his foreign policy advisor? What do you think?
This is an invitation to the heads of the SAARC countries. He is the head of government for Pakistan. If the other heads of SAARC countries show up, I think it would be the wrong kind of message for Nawaz Sharif not to go.
I think, isn't there the head of another country that's sending someone else?
I think the Bangladeshi, but that's only because
yeah.
there was a previously scheduled foreign visit. I believe that Sheikh Hasina is going to be in Japan.
Okay.
So those things are scheduled in advance. But otherwise, the SAARC leaders are coming. And in terms of optics, you know, at least in India, the way this is going to play out is that he has reached out publicly to Nawaz Sharif and invited him. If Nawaz Sharif does not come, it'll be seen as a snub. So it really won't be seen as, it's not the best way to start off on this relationship for both countries.
So, Shuja, your prediction is Mr. Sharif going?
I think he should go, and he can go, and it'll be an opportunity to have a sideline discussion, to at least get some things straight between the two, and then to understand each other better as well as the constraints. One thing that we should avoid is any kind of irrational exuberance about these changes. India is a huge enterprise. It will take a long time for Modi to shift the Indian ship of state around in a new direction. He will need all the help that he can get from the neighborhood, and if he can integrate the neighborhood instead of being seen as a regional hegemon, then he will be able to achieve a lot for his own people, and in the process, so will the other countries that he partners with, like Bangladesh, like Pakistan. But he's going to have to build alliances inside India too, because power has been shifting to the provinces. He's going to have to bring on Mamata Banerjee in Bengal. He's going to have to get the Akali Dal on his side and to continue this relationship with Pakistan and the Punjab, the two Punjabs. There's going to be a lot of bridge building that will be required.
Okay, so not to be irrationally exuberant, but could it be, Sadanan, an ideal situation when both countries, India and Pakistan, have rightist leaders that are strong leaders, their parties have got the mandate, and Congress always allegedly faced this accusation that they were too soft in Pakistan to cater to their Muslim vote bank. And People's Party was always considered the secular liberal party and therefore too soft in India. So could this be the combination that can make it work?
I mean, certainly, you know, there's this, you know, to use the cliche, it's a Nixon in China moment, right? Potentially, it's the hardline guy who can always go out and make peace and make gestures of peace. That's certainly true. But it's also equally true that these things are a little bit more fragile when you've got the both right-wing leaders, because they both also have to keep one eye on a domestic constituency which is not as friendly towards the other country so it's a tricky thing. But certainly, if you're optimistic, you certainly can say that, particularly because both Nawaz Sharif and Narendra Modi are business-friendly, pragmatic leaders, that there is potential and that we can hope that they could get it right.
And Nawaz Sharif has been talking, he actually campaigned on it, better relationships with India. What would it take on Indian side to reciprocate that?
I think the Indian side, there are two things. And Shuja already, talked about the terrorism trials from the 2008 Mumbai attacks, and it's hard to exaggerate the degree to which that's really left a bad taste in the mouth in many Indians, not just people who are traditionally hostile to Pakistan, but just ordinary Indians. So that's one part of it. And secondly, which would be the most favored nation trading status, just to normalize trade ties, right? I mean, just to have a normal trading relationship between South Asia's two largest economies. I mean, it's a sad statement, and it's about the region that these two countries don't have a normal trading relationship.
So let's talk about the foreign policy team that Modi may be anticipating. What kind of team should he have, does he need, that he wants? Starting with you, Shuja.
Well, this is one of the most well-kept secrets in India. Normally, secrets don't stay secret very long. One of the more amusing aspects of the post-election period has been the many op-eds that have been written by people that are, in my words, thinly disguised job applications. Before the elections and even while the elections are going on, when I was in India, I met any number of people who told me that they were very close to Modi or that they were advising him on this issue or that issue. And now they're writing op-eds, basically saying, pick me. He's been very close-mouthed about the whole issue. But within the next week or so, we will know what kind of a team he's going to put together. And it'll be very critical for him to show a very powerful signal of a team that can work together. The last thing he wants is to bring in people that are so far apart from each other in order to calm their constituencies that the government will not work. The other is to be able to win over the bureaucracy and then reduce their power. That's a huge challenge for any leader in India. Now, he is well equipped for it because he has a huge mandate. He's not going to have small groups of his coalition with catcalls or criticisms from the side or trying to blackmail him, as was the case previously in the Pakistani coalition or in the Indian coalition government. So he has a much better position to deal with changes. But I don't think we should expect miracles. I think he doesn't expect miracles. It's simply defining the long-term aims of an integrated neighborhood, a resurgent India economically, and a relationship with Pakistan, which is different from it has been in the last 60 years.
So none of the names that are floating around and that have written op-eds, thinly disguised?
I think some of those names will almost certainly be there, but we don't know which ones because he's keeping this very close to his chest. Yeah. But you have just to add one small thing to that. I think it's particularly important to wait for the team because Modi is not a foreign policy guy. So the kinds of, unlike the last BJP Prime Minister, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who had been a foreign minister and was kind of, deeply familiar with Indian foreign policy, Modi has some experience in foreign economic policy, but he's not really a foreign policy guy. So the people he ends up choosing, the national security advisor, and the foreign minister in particular, are going to be key choices that allow us a little bit more insight into what his foreign policy is going to look like.
And the commerce minister. I think that's going to be a very critical position given the status of relationships with Pakistan and beyond with Afghanistan.
When we're talking about relations with Pakistan and Afghanistan, Afghanistan is going to be a critical year this year. How important will it be in Afghanistan how Pakistan and India play it? Because some people suggest the worst, a proxy war between Pakistan and India. Some suggest the best. What are you looking at it?
Well, I'm seeing the possibility of a partnership of sorts, at least initially a truce of some kind between them, because a stable Afghanistan offers them a chance to create an integrated market of Central Asia, Afghanistan, and South Asia. And an unstable Afghanistan with Pakistan in the middle means India can't access those markets or the energy resources that it needs from Central Asia. So there's something in it for everyone, but what you don't want is for Pakistan to see itself simply as a transit point. Pakistan needs to get something out of these relationships. And so what's been very heartening in the Afghan elections has been seeing that Pakistanis actually managed to shut down the border with Afghanistan. And there was no overt Pakistani involvement in the Afghan election. If they can maintain this posture and build a proper relationship with Afghanistan as a neighbor and a fellow, rather than as a client state or potential client state, then I think the relationships will be for the better for all of them.
Okay, but Sadanand, today's attack wasn't the first one. There have been past attacks. We also heard this news recently that India is going to buy arms from Russia to supply to Afghanistan, which seems to be worrying Pakistan. So given those kinds of developments, could there be another tussle in there that we see in future?
I certainly hope that, I would certainly agree with Shuja in terms of what the desired outcome is. I'm a little bit less sanguine about that being the likely outcome. I think that it remains to be seen I think there are powerful groups in both countries that really do in many ways see this as a zero-sum game. The attack in Herat is clearly a signal that, or seems to be a signal, and would certainly be taken as a signal that it's not as though everyone's ready to start a new chapter. And so my own sense is that there is going to continue to be this contestation, and I don't think that contestation is going to diminish under a Modi government, and nor do I think that the Pakistani establishment, and here particularly I'm talking about the military and the ISI, is more likely to be to take the victory of Modi and a Modi administration as reason for them to be more trusting of Indian intentions. It's obviously going to work in the opposite direction. So while I would hope that economic pragmatism prevails on all sides, it's not clear to me that that's likely to happen.
And Shuja, how do you see the leader in Afghanistan balancing the relationship between Pakistan and India, and how important is it for him to do so?
Well, it is important because India has been one of the largest supporters of Afghanistan with economic assistance from the region, well over $1.3 billion of assistance. Pakistan cannot match that. It's in the $300 million range that they've provided assistance to Afghanistan. So Afghanistan would definitely want a market in India. It wants transit trade so that their trucks can go all the way into India rather than stopping at the border with India. Once Afghanistan becomes an exporter of energy itself, then it would want to be able to sell that energy in the greater South Asian market. These are all the logical, proper things to do. But the reality is that there are many different interests, and the question will be how the relationship between the Pakistani military and the Afghan military develops. Now, we saw last week the trilateral committee meeting, so the heads of the military of United States, Afghanistan, and Pakistan have begun their meetings yet again. There was a hiatus in between with the departure of General Kiani. That kind of conversation has to continue. Perhaps at some point it'll be critical for the military chiefs of India and Pakistan to meet. Perhaps at some point it'll be critical for the head of the ISI and the IB to meet. Because this is the way to remove all the suspicions about Indian involvement in Balochistan, Pakistani involvement with activities in Kashmir, or fomenting other activities via Bangladesh. These issues have to be brought out in the open. And then on the trade front, very importantly, I think there are serious concerns within Pakistan. India is, after all, a huge economic presence. So India may have to offer some voluntary export restraints as a means of resolving it. But I go back to the earlier issue that both Sadanand and I have mentioned, which is that you have to remove the Mumbai roadblock from all of this. That's a huge psychological barrier to normalization. And I think both countries need to focus on that and make sure that if anything untoward happens, that they're prepared to talk down rather than ratchet up the war rhetoric. So
let's talk about the Mumbai roadblock, because that seems to be the biggest issue between the two countries psychologically. Hafiz Saeed was arrested. The court let him out. The Pakistani, at least the Punjabi government, says, what can we do? We did what was legal. India says, no, we've given you plenty of evidence. He should be behind bars. What would be, in India's eyes, doing enough from the side of Pakistan?
I mean, a couple of things, right? I mean, first of all, I think I think any reasonable person, and particularly on the Indian side of the border, finds it appalling that people like Hafiz Saeed are basically running around, have free reign, giving press conferences, issuing inflammatory statements. This is not some ordinary person. This is an international terrorist. This is a person who has, there's a $10 billion bounty on information leading to his arrest from the U.S. government. Yes. 10 million, did I say billion?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, 10 million bounty on. So this is a major international terrorist, and I think the fact that this person has the kind of freedom that he has in Pakistan, whereas a lot of good, decent, liberal people are basically scared for their lives, is appalling. So part of it is just the optics of it. The other part is just the fact that there have been no successful prosecutions. that this is a horrific attack, and more than 5 years later, that nobody, after all the evidence, both not just from Indians, but there's so much international evidence too. There are transcripts of phone calls. It's just the weight of evidence is so large, and that is contrasted with a complete lack of conviction. I mean, you can understand if the Pakistani system doesn't go as far as some Indians would like. That would be rational. But to argue that there's nothing is just a bit much.
Shuja.
There are serious problems with the legal system. It's antiquated. The forensics have been very poor. Evidence is very badly presented. And so the courts have had no difficulty in throwing cases out. And they've done that regularly. Some effort has been made in the last 2 years to use regulations rather than new laws to improve the legal position. And in my view, it's not simply a question of relying on the forensic evidence related to the actual attacks, but there are other issues. The financing of these organizations, over which the State Bank of Pakistan has very strong jurisdiction. You can track monies in and out. You can be able to use the financial information and thereby end up throwing people in jail. I mean, everyone refers to the famous Al Capone conviction. The man was not convicted of murder or mayhem. He was convicted of tax fraud. So there are mechanisms available. There has to be a political will to do that. This government in Pakistan must decide if it wants to protect the Punjab, because there have been allegations that it is trying to keep the extreme elements
out
satisfied.
of Punjab and elsewhere.
Exactly.
Are you saying that, and we saw 5 years of a previous government as well, are you saying that the political will has been missing to go after these guys?
Absolutely.
And do you see indications that this government has the political will, or you're waiting to see it?
Well, they've actually launched a new national internal security strategy, but that needs to be a strategy aimed at the whole country. So they need to have a firm position on it and build public support for it. And I'm sure that they will find it if they're ready to lead on it.
Okay. And now, the very worst case scenario, what many in South Asia fear, Sadanand, what if there's another Mumbai?
Well, I think all bets are off if there's another Mumbai. I'd argue that that would have been the case regardless of who was in power in India. Because I think India displayed extraordinary forbearance after that attack. It would be very, very difficult given the kind of public pressure there would be to have some kind of retaliation. So I think we should all just, keep our fingers crossed that that is something that doesn't go beyond the realm of speculation into reality.
And Shuja, what can the Pakistani government do to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Well, both governments need to have much better communication between them at different levels, between the military, between the civilians, the political leaders, because if there is such an attack, it'll be outside their control, and they need to be able to talk to each other quickly and deeply enough to be able to work together to deal with whatever situation arises, rather than deal in the old manner where they had no idea what was happening on the other side and decisions were being made, which this time may not be the same decisions that were made the last time. You may actually find people pressing the button on both sides, and that would be disastrous for the region and the world.
It will be disastrous for the world because we're looking at two nuclear-armed states.
Yes.
And I don't think they have enough time to talk to each other unless tempers are calm enough. Well, thank you very much, both of you. It was an intriguing, interesting discussion. I'll definitely have you both again once Mr. Modi's completed his first 6 months or maybe a year. Let me thank my guest, Shuja Nawaz, the Director of South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council, and Sadanand Dume, the Fellow at American Enterprise Institute and a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Thank you for watching. I look for your comments on our Facebook pages and our Twitter. Thanks for watching. Join us again next week for another episode of Access Tomorrow.